Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Courtney Powell, COO and Managing Partner of 500 Global. Excited to share with you all today my conversation with Balaji Srinivasan, who joins us remotely today from Southeast Asia. Balaji is an angel investor and an entrepreneur, formerly the CTO of Coinbase and general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. He was also the co-founder of Earn.com, which was acquired by Coinbase, Counsel, acquired by Myriad, Teleport, acquired by Topia, and CoinCenter. He was named to MIT's Technology Review's Innovators Under 35, won a Wall Street Journal Innovation Award, and holds an BS, MS, and a PhD in electrical engineering and an MS in chemical engineering, all from Stanford. But beyond all of this, many of you may know him for his early awareness that he created of COVID-19 in the tech community, and today for his provocative and cogent analysis of our present reality as well as our future state. We'll cover his thoughts today on Jack Dorsey's incredible run at Twitter, the need for the pseudonymous economy, and the extremes that we can see in capital. We only have time to share 20 minutes of our conversation today, but you can follow me on Twitter at Courtney Powell, where we'll share the full conversation later this week. To learn more about Balaji's most recent project, sign up at 1729.com, a project that will extend the concepts behind cryptocurrencies into startup cities and network states. Catch him on Twitter at BalajiS. Thank you.
Balaji, thank you so much for speaking today at PreMoney. Like I said, we've had so many people really excited to hear this conversation. You've had so many interesting things to say lately. And I think in particular with regard to what's happening in BC, the broader capital markets, and some of the macro trends really affecting what we do, it's a great time to really have you here and hear more. But before we jump in, yes, thanks again. Before we jump in, just quickly, I think we all heard the news in the last 24 hours or so of Jack stepping down from Twitter. Wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, it's obviously a huge thing. Twitter was actually one of the last founder-led companies of that generation. It's an enormous thing to take something like that from one laptop all the way through the various trials and tribulations, all the various political stuff, the technical stuff, the fail whale. Jack wasn't CEO during all of that time, but he's certainly a very important figure over much of it. And so first of all, it's just like an amazing run. It's like an all-star player just hanging up their cleats. The first thing you just got to do is pay respect. That's like a Hall of Fame career right there. And then, the second is, of course, Twitter is the agora of the English internet. It is the battlefield of ideas. It's where everybody goes and slugs it out every day. Sign of Weibo, that's like Weibo. That's a similar thing for the Chinese internet, except it's different because you have a central administrator who's more official about it, right? Twitter is more reluctant to kind of go and centrally administrate. I think the most important question from this that a lot of people are speculating about is what happens with Twitter's efforts on decentralization. Parag is being a fan of Project Blue Sky, the decentralized Twitter, for a while. He recruited Jay Graber, our Selenia, who's very competent to run it. But it's also a very difficult thing to do. It's comparable to Adobe going and converting from shrink wrap software to a subscription service. It's a massive back-end cultural, et cetera, change. Even aside from the regulatory stuff, it's just very technically challenging. So what happens with that, I think, is one of the most important things, because Twitter is, speech on the internet, in the English internet. Even if there's other fora, nothing else has quite as many intellectuals or whatever that come to slug it out, So I think it's important. We'll see what happens. It could be that, it's like Satya, and, the last year or so, one thing that I think everybody has seen is that Twitter has shipped a tremendous amount of new features, very unusually for a company that's this late in its history to accelerate like that, with Twitter Blue. And, I can't even remember all of them. There's quite a few. It's like the custom icons and sort of like they actually load a subscription service. Wow. Oh my God. That's a huge boost for Wall Street. And it's cheap also, for a power user, you pay more than that. They rolled out a new API. They did a bunch of stuff. So it's kind of a good time to quit while one is ahead, I guess. And, outside of that, that's the stuff that I can talk about, because there's, kind of historical context. But any late breaking thing, who knows, some information could come out that changes everybody's perspective on it. We'll have to see. TLDR is congrats to Jack, congrats to Parag. I hope they do the decentralization of Web3. I'm cheering them on, and it was a great run.
Awesome. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's really hard to imagine somebody who's had more impact at such a global scale than Jack has with both Twitter and Square. So certainly,
it's funny because Musk and Zuck and others get sort of more time in the limelight. It's funny, for as influential and impactful as Jack has been on the global political landscape, he's sort of, it's weird to put it this way because he's, got millions of followers, but relatively speaking, doesn't attract as much attention or props as, Musk and Zuck in some ways, and of course, brickbats. But it's really hard to, once you're lucky, twice you're good. To build two companies the scale of Twitter and Square from scratch, that's very impressive. So
yeah, I mean, thinking about the platforms, and certainly I think some of the work that he's done. You talked recently about the pseudonymous economy and really, why you think that's something that we need to all be thinking about and paying attention to. And I'm curious kind of what drove your thinking around the concept.
So that's actually is very relevant because Square is actually one of the first participants in the pseudonymous economy, where they hired a pseudonymous Bitcoin developer a few years ago, just known by kind of a funny acronym. Okay. And, there's a continuity. It might be the case that somebody in HR or legal had to know their name for legal purposes or filing forms. Okay. But I think we're going to start treating your quote real name like your social security number. And we're the last generation that are going to use our quote real names on the internet, because even the term real name, it's kind of like a stolen base. Okay. Because it's not something where your hair color is black or whatever. That's something that's like kind of built into me. That's my real hair. If I dyed it blonde, it would not be my real hair. But my real name, that's not something that's like encoded in my genes. It's something that is a state identifier. And I can go into, what's the alternative to that? Rather than a single global identifier that's recorded in a state database, I can go to any website. I can go to Reddit. I can go to Twitter. I can go to Hacker News, whatever. And I can say, call me Ishmael. Okay, I can use whatever name I want at whatever time. And now it's no longer a global identifier where anybody can stalk you and join all these disparate data sets together to kind of to profile you. Okay. And, we don't really think about that, but that's really what it is. Another name for a name is a handle. Have you heard that term before?
Yes.
Like a right? So a handle, one way to visualize it is literally like a handle on a file cabinet. Knowing one's name, you can pull out all this information on somebody. Okay. And, what's happened, I think, over the last 20, 30 years is, you may recall in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a generation that was actually very reticent about putting stuff on the internet. There's going to be stalkers. Like people can steal your credit card. It was considered to be stranger danger, untrusted zone, right? And what happened was, over about 10, 15 years with the rise of social networking and the sharing economy, people got over that. They're like, whoa, actually, let's get on in. The water's warm. It's pretty cool. And what we didn't realize is we were still using the trust that we had built offline to constrain negative behavior online. And so then what happened is once people got sort of accustomed to the novelty, and once the digital started flipping and becoming the primary rather than the mirror, that is to say, you weren't 95% of the time in the physical world and 5% of the time on the internet. Here's a question, Courtney, how much, and for the audience as well to think about, okay, of your waking hours, what percentage of your waking hours do you spend looking at a screen of some kind?
An embarrassing amount, I would say. I don't know, probably.
A lot, right? More than 50%, right? That's, probably right. So that's your laptop, that's your phone, that's your tablet. You should also include, I don't know, your Fitbit or something else like that, something electronic, some dashboard, right? So that means that actually the rest of our lives are going to be spent in the matrix. Okay? Just take a beat and just, right? That is something where, physics is the language of the physical world, but computer science and statistics, all the metaverse and crypto stuff, that is the language of this digital world that we have essentially migrated to. And the norms of that world, we're kind of relearning physics because it's just different than the offline world. For example, you and I may be thousands of miles apart right now in physical space, but we're proximal in digital space because we're 1 degree away in a social network. Okay, that's the difference between the sort of geographical distance and the geodesic distance in a social network. And that's actually something where you can form cloud continents on that basis. You can find people who are close together socially as opposed to geographically, and it gives you a completely different map of the world. You may have seen that Facebook did this several years ago. They had those things all connecting, that blue map. Have you seen that? What I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yes. So the point basically is that in this digital world, we need to kind of realize that what we just did over the last 20, 25 years is we uploaded the entire world unencrypted on the internet. You were not meant to have 3 billion people able to stalk you. Okay, that is just not how human society was set up. And so what we're going to do, I think, is re-encrypt, and lots more things, are already going to like Signal group chats, right? And what we want to do is, with the pseudonymous economy, the reason I think this is not just a technical feasibility, but a moral necessity, the concept of the pseudonymous economy is separate out your earning name, your speaking name, and your real name. You might have multiple ones of these, okay? You might have a different name for each job, and you might be able to use zero knowledge to prove that you had these credentials at the past job and nothing else, okay? And the thing about this is, what I like about it is it pulls from very different sort of political schools. You have the progressive concept of ban the box, like don't ask people who have, served their time of past convictions. You have the concept of blind auditions. You have the idea that you shouldn't be asking about immigration or marital status in an interview because that's not, necessary information. And then, conversely, you have the ideal of, anybody in the world should be willing worker, like they say that you shouldn't have to discriminate against somebody on their nationality or accent or something like that invidiously. And so what happens is the pseudonymous economy stops through code, both discrimination and cancellation. You can't do either, right? You can't discriminate if you don't know their gender, their race, et cetera. And in particular, one thing that's advancing rapidly are AI avatars. As I mentioned, I think Zoom is sort of like a transitional thing. You know how like you've got a paper document, then you've got a scanner that's like an intermediate form, then you've got a fully digital document, yeah? Or we've got paper currency, then we've got PayPal, then we have Bitcoin as fully digital currency. So Zoom is like an intermediate where we have offline in-person meeting. Then we have this, which is sort of like scanning our physical form. Okay. And then we're going to get to like full metaverse type avatars. And they're going to engineer them so that the load on the eyes is less, it's very lightweight contacts or holograms. Well, they'll figure it out so that it's not as much eye strain. That's an engineering problem. And at that point, you are whoever you want to be at any time. And it's the opposite of bringing your whole self to work. It's bringing your minimum necessary self to work. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that every single person will do this. I am, however, saying that this is an important equilibrium to aim for. The nature of a compromise is that it's usually nobody's first choice, but it's an acceptable choice. And this is a way forward, I see, from the current world of just random discrimination, cancellation, et cetera, online to a stable equilibrium, rather than simply, in my view, sort of naively pining for the pre-internet era. Okay, let me pause there and get your thoughts.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's interesting. It kind of makes me think of the Bruce Willis movie Surrogates. Like, are we heading full on to having a separate representation from ourselves? And I think one of the things you mentioned, and not just the portability of reputations and the ability to have multiple selves, whether it's your work self, your personal self, et cetera, but how much of that thinking is driven by what you've shared recently? I think you termed it the Great Awokening. And so dominating mindsets that are evolving right now and that we're hearing about so much.
Yeah, so that term is actually Matthew Iglesias' phrase, former co-founder of Vox. He's now got his own newsletter and is struck out on his own. And essentially it's a play on words where essentially there have been these Christian revival, movements within the U.S. where people, found spirituality again after a long time of being secular and materialistic or what have you, and they kind of, were very religious again. And those have, in the past have been called Great Awakenings. And he had a play on words where he called it the Great Awokening as a play on words with the term woke, right? Which, definitions differ, but it's like an excessively, virtue signaling form of really insincere activity that's meant to gain likes and RTs on social media without actually doing something, right? It's parodied, now there's quite a few parodies of that. But the thing about this is, there's many reasons that I think the Great Awakening has happened. One is that we built social networks before cryptocurrency. And why is that impactful? Well, in a real sense, if communism was the redistribution of money, wokeness is the redistribution of status. So communism was supposedly for the workers and peasants, but it was terrible for them. And wokeness is for women and minorities, but I'm a minority, you're female, we may not actually think it's always the best thing, right? And so it's something where that redistribution of status is basically hearts go from one person to the other, right? If you can whip out the right language, and all this stuff filtered out of academia, right? So you can think of academia as this place where you heard that saying, like in academia, the politics are so vicious because the stakes are so small. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Okay. So the concept is that essentially all these academics have been developing these sort of like verbal knives to like shiv their competitors in these like English journals or whatever, right? And then suddenly it was, Twitter entered and social media entered. And so it was like this cache of weapons that was just dumped out and that people could just sort of pick up and just start stabbing people on social media with these like witty kind of, Foucauldian bumper sticker kind of things. And it would just tear down the other person, make them look so bad. And, it would give you, the oppressed, some status. The problem is though that the doctrine of intersectionality actually turns everybody into an oppressor because, and again, I'm not trying to offend anybody here, but I'll just point out, on the order of like 13% of the world is white, 50% is male, 90% is straight, 99% is cis. And so what you start to get is somebody is an oppressor always on some axis, okay? They are, if you do the or statement, 99.99% of the world is one of those categories, okay? And so what happens is that means that you can just be blindsided and attacked at any moment on your oppressor category. This is sort of like people saying math is white supremacist for a particularly egregious and stupid example. When it's obviously not, it's like the property of all people. This is something where somebody who is who's a civil rights activist, they can be attacked as a man. They can be attacked as a white woman and so on and so forth. So it promises liberation, but actually delivers a society where everybody's constantly looking over their shoulder, hoping somebody else isn't going to cancel them. And this is the same thing. Go ahead.
Or, really is you must sympathize. And I think that's a great summary of woke capital is that's the expectation. Like everybody's bowing for something.
That's right. So I basically think of it as there's kind of three most powerful forces in the world today are NYT, CCP, BTC, which are woke capital, communist capital, crypto capital. And their sort of ethoses respectively are you must sympathize, you must submit, you must be sovereign. Okay, so let's take CCP first, okay? The Chinese Communist Party, they have the most easy to understand ethos, which is they're powerful, therefore you must submit. Okay, they've got this gigantic army, they've got the surveillance state, they know everything about you, bend the knee. Okay, kind of makes sense, has a logic to it, it's not great. So you must submit, all right. Woke capital though does a little trick, and the trick is you must sympathize. So with communist capital, you bow your head because the Communist Party is powerful, because they are powerful. With woke capital, the trick is to make you bow your head because you are powerful, because you are white, because you are male, because you are straight or rich or whatever it is, right? Like, successful, blah, blah, blah. Something, some often an immutable characteristic can be turned into a reason why you are a bad person, right? You have a collective guilt, yeah? And so it ends in the same place as communist capital, where what they're asking for is for you to bow your head in shame. It is fundamentally an ideology of submission also, but it's kind of a left-handed version with like a little bit of a curly Q on it, okay? And then the third is crypto capital, BTC, you must be sovereign. So rather than saying you must submit or you must sympathize, you must be sovereign says you need to hold your private keys, you need to take care of yourself, don't trust people, live in extremists, it's like live in a cabin in the woods, blah, 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 right? Now, the thing about this is, while it's a caricature, you can think of these 3 points. Do you know what the political compass is, the political compass meme?
No.
No? Okay. If you Google the political compass meme, this is kind of this fun thing where it's got like a square with 4 quadrants, and it's authoritarian left, authoritarian right, libertarian left, libertarian right. Okay. And the way you can sort of think about it is like communism is the top left, fascism is like the top right, wokeness is like the bottom left, and like ultra-libertarianism or maximalism is like the bottom right. Okay, those are like the extremists, okay? And extremal points. And the thing about this is you can sort of think of NYT, CCP, and BTC as sort of being like an inscribed triangle. So I know this sounds maybe a little, almost numerological, but there's a way to actually quantify this. There's something called the spatial theory of voting. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Do you know what that is? So essentially, political ideology is actually amenable to quantification. There's academics who will take essentially vote matrices, okay? So you'll take N people, you'll take K votes. For example, they're Congress people, and they've voted on this issue 0, this issue 1, this issue is 0, et cetera. So each person, you've got a vote vector, okay? And what you can do is you can take this matrix, which is N people by K columns, and project it down into N people by 2 columns and plot that, and you get clusters that kind of look like these concepts that we've been talking about, right? So it's not simply like a mental construct. It's something that is amenable to quantification. You can also see people move around the map. You can see ideological clusters form. Spatial theory of voting puts this on a quantitative scale, right? And you can also predict where somebody's going to vote on an issue by their similarity to other people based on their votes, other things. It's the same logic, frankly, that's used for like predicting what you're going to buy on Amazon. Like you've bought things that look like this other person, so you're going to vote with your wallet in a similar way. Okay, all right. So the point is that when we think about where the sort of like world ideologies are today, there's sort of like the left libertarian pole down over here, woke capital. You have the right libertarian pole of crypto capital, and then you have the top middle, which is the CCP, which is like a nationalist socialism, like a total state. And the thing about it is all 3 points are bad, but also their opposites are bad if you take them to the extreme, okay? In the extreme of like, quote, sympathy, you have something which I don't think is good, which is something like, white people have to go to the back of the line for vaccines, okay? I consider that bad, okay? Who's going to determine who's white? This is just some stupid thing. Conversely, the other side of that, you get like Jim Crow, which is also bad, okay? So the extreme opposite, people always binarize it. They're like, oh, you're for this, and you must be for that. And similarly with communist capital, totally submitting to the surveillance state doesn't really seem like, maybe in the short run you get some peace, but in the long run, they can do some very bad things. However, on the other side where nobody ever submits to anything, then you've got Grand Theft Auto San Francisco. You have people smashing and grabbing. You have just, open air crime everywhere, right? And finally, with sovereignty, being completely sovereign actually is almost a rejection of capitalism because there's no division of labor, right? You're so libertarian that you're against the market. You're against anybody starting a company because it's a scam. They pre-mine the equity or what have you, right? And yet, on the other corner of that, of course, giving up your sovereignty completely is also bad. That leads you back to authoritarianism. So if we sort of kind of think of these sort of extremal movements and their opposites as being bad, well, what is good? And my answer there is that, it's incumbent upon, I think, people of goodwill to carve out something I call the decentralized center, where you are sort of giving something to each corner, but you're not going to the extreme. You are inclusive enough, diverse enough, meritocratic enough, et cetera, to, in a particular, global enough, and that's a huge thing for 500 startups in particular. I think you've been very early on that, and I admire that a lot. And actually, something I'm also working on funding all this talent around the world. That's something which actually marries the best of the bottom left and the bottom right. Where you don't discriminate, and it's really good for business and for lifting up through free market.